Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's following us. Welcome to the launching of the sustainable dimension of the BC hashtag initiative. In my first initial comments, I'm going to focus on three things: the responsibility of the Central Bank of Brazil facing structural changes in the economy, the emergence of risks, socio-economic risks, as well as their implications to the monetary authorities, and the new dimension of sustainability in the BC hashtag agenda. As for the first point, the Central Bank of Brazil has an objective to ensure the stability of price as well as ensure the solidity and efficiency of the financial national system. In order to reach these objectives, the central bank needs to remain on the borderline of its actions, answering to shocks and risk present and future, the evolution of demands of society, and the structural changes in the economy. For brevity, the BCB's action must be dynamic and comprehensive. The current dimensions and actions of the current BC hashtag agenda responds to these needs. PIX and open banking, for example, are prompt responses to technological changes in payment systems and the evolution of society's demands in search of a swift, competitive, and safe financial system. But how can that be related to the climate agenda? Similar to our recent actions in technological front, the new sustainability agenda of the Agenda BC hashtag was developed to respond to yet another set of structural changes in the economy. The new dimension responds to the emergence of new risks and demands from the society. It is clear that climate events that were previously considered rare have become more frequent. Such events are accompanied by changes in main economic variables in the relevant horizon of monetary policy, in addition to bringing significant risks to the financial system. Increasingly, climate shocks, wildfires, droughts, floods, extreme poverty, temperatures affect relative prices in the economy and therefore may have an impact on our monetary policy decisions. The same extreme events put the national financial risk system at risk and may change the demand for currency, physical assets, and loan collateral values, in addition to bring high value costs, financial costs to our society. So in order to meet the needs of the central bank's mandate determined by law of ensuring price stability and guaranteeing the soundness and efficiency of the national financial system, we must prepare and respond appropriately to these structural changes in the economy. The central bank's policy making must consider social environmental risks as well as the impact of extreme events on our economy and the financial system. With that in mind, we launched today a new dimension to our agenda. The new sustainability agenda of the BC hashtag is dynamic and comprehensive, embracing all the areas of the bank. The actions included in the sustainability pillar include social and environmental responsibility measures geared towards both the financial system as well as the central bank. The role of central banks and financial markets in promoting sustainable financial and mitigating the effects of climate risk is rapidly evolving theme in Brazil and worldwide. It is on this frontier that we must be. Thus, the set of measures that we present today is comprehensive, but by no means exhaustive. The new sustainability dimension will continue to evolve over time, just as we do with all the other pillars of the Agenda BC hashtag. In addition, the challenges to financial system brought by climate changes demand a coordinated and global action. Our growing interaction with other banks, central banks, and international organizations, as well as frequent dialogue with financial institutions, are important to determine the evolution of our policies to minimize the effects of climate risks on our economy and financial system. Such interactions allow for the exchange of information and best practices, which deepening our understanding of the risks associated with climate change. Striving for this integrated, coordinated, and global approach, besides presenting more details of our BCB's agenda, in our event today we have guest speakers from both Brazil and the world financial markets to underscore the importance of this issue at hand and to discuss the responses that we need to the challenges we need to face. We have a full agenda, so let's continue with our event, and we will start with the participation of our speakers, and then we are going to have the presentation of Governor Roberto Campos Neto and Deputy Governors detailing the new dimension of the Agenda BCB hashtag. I now hand the floor to the first speaker, Larry Fink. Mr. Fink is the President and CEO of BlackRock Corporation from the United States on financial management. In a recent communication to his investors, Mr. Fink affirmed that the climate changes have become a decisive factor in the perspective of companies in the long run, and that the consciousness is changing rapidly regarding the theme as well as a structural change in the finances. It is just because of this awareness in the financial system that we would like to hear a little bit further on the subject. Mr. Fink.
Joining us, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy in these uncertain times. It's a pleasure to have been invited to share my thoughts on the evolution of investing and the importance of ESG with all of you as you announce the bank's sustainability agenda. The actions the bank are announcing today are significant, not just because Brazil is a major world economy and the largest in Latin America, but because of the place Brazil occupies in the hearts and minds of people all around the world when it comes to the environment and to climate change. In addition to being a land of incredible biodiversity, Brazil was a host to the historical 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit, which laid the foundation for global cooperation on climate change, culminating with the Paris Agreement over 20 years later. Today, climate change remains the key issue for financial institutions, governments, central banks, but it's not just for one piece of the sustainability discussion that is top of mind of our clients. Let me just say that in my 44 years of investing, I have never seen anything like this. The amount of dialogue, the amount of interest, the debate about sustainability is pretty astonishing. And I want to use this opportunity to walk you through my own experience, my own observations, and share my perspective on how sustainability is transforming markets worldwide. For those of you who are less familiar with BlackRock, we are the largest asset management company in the world. We act as fiduciaries on behalf of millions of people worldwide. 2/3 of the $7 trillion of assets we manage are related to retirement. It's a responsibility that we take very seriously. And as a fiduciary, we have to follow the wishes of our clients. None of the $7 trillion of is BlackRock's money. All of it is our clients' money. BlackRock's purpose is to help more and more people experience financial well-being, and sustainable investing is increasingly critical to developing and delivering on that promise. In January, BlackRock outlined a series of initiatives to continue to integrate sustainability into how we manage risk, how we build portfolios, how we design products, and how we engage with companies on behalf of our clients. For BlackRock, this is all driven by our investment view that sustainable integrated portfolios can offer our clients a better, I want to reiterate, a better long-term risk-adjusted return. Sustainable investing does not come at the expenses of alpha generation. In fact, it's an increasingly critical ingredient to driving more and more of investment returns. Our conviction is simple. ESG reminds me of the 50-year debate about whether index or active management was better. A decade ago, BlackRock set out to settle that debate. Our investment conviction was that investors needed both index and active management. It was not an either or decision. Fast forwarding to today, the world's most sophisticated investors, including global central banks, embrace both index funds, ETFs, and active management. To them, it's just investing. And that's exactly what I think will happen to ESG within the next decade. ESG risk factors will be integrated in every investment process. It won't be one or another. It will be a component of how we think, how we invest, how we evaluate risk. ESG will be part of that, and it'll be part of the whole foundation of investing. In January, I made the clear statement that climate risk is investment risk. Even with the global pandemic, climate change is still invariable one of the top issues that clients around the world rate in our discussions with us, seeking to understand both the physical risk of climate change as well as how climate policy would impact prices, how climate change or climate policy could impact costs, and then demand across global economies. Based on these conversations and our own research, it's clear to BlackRock that climate risk is an underappreciated risk, and it's underpriced. Climate risk is beginning to drive a reallocation of capital with increasingly momentum. It will have a profound impact on the pricing of risk and assets around the world. But climate risk is not just one of the components of ESG. Today, I want to underscore that all ESG-related risks are more and more investment risk. The tremendous toll of the COVID-19 crisis on health, economic well-being, and everyday activity has precipitated a reassessment of the way we live our lives. For governments, for business, for consumers, for investors, things have changed very quickly. The crisis has accelerated several trends affecting our industry and our clients. We're seeing an ever greater reliance on technology. Right now, globalization is in retreat. Social inequality is widening as the most vulnerable shoulder a larger burden on the disease. The greater awareness of ESG and sustainable risk on investment portfolios. COVID and climate change are both existential risks. They are physical rather than financial crises for the world. They both reinforce the fragility of the interconnectedness of our global ecosystem in which we are operating today. Through the COVID crisis, we have seen two major things. One, we've found a strong correlation between sustainable characteristics and factors such as quality and low volatility, which led to increased resilience and better risk-adjusted returns. Investors have increasingly sought out sustainable investment strategies amidst all this uncertainty this year. And our research shows the rising salience of stakeholderism and their centric issues, including how business engage with their clients, with their employees, and in every community they work in. 2 years ago, I wrote about the importance of every company operating with a sense of purpose. And that in order to deliver durable long-term returns for your shareholders, company needs to focus on all their stakeholders, but not just their shareholders. That means companies have to focus on how they treat their employees, how are they constructive members of the community where they work and operate. And it is my proposition that companies who focus on their employees, companies who focus on their clients, companies that focus on the communities where they work, they will have durable long-term profits that will be the benefit to the shareholders. So I firmly believe that purpose, which in turn speaks to the importance of operating on behalf of all stakeholders, is what makes companies great. Companies that build their business on sustainable foundations will contribute and continue to be rewarded by the markets over the long term. BlackRock's research indicates that asset prices and portfolio risk do not currently reflect the broad swath of sustainable related factors I've discussed today. These factors can be characterized in three categories. One, physical impact due to climate change. Two, impacts associated with a transition to a low carbon economy. Three, a broad range of non-financial factors that can impact a company's operational effectiveness and resiliency, as well as its own public perception and social license to operate in those communities. This will all impact relative valuation between one company and another in their industry, and will impact industry to industry. And it's only going to accelerate through both enhanced disclosures and public awareness of sustainable related characteristics, which will continue to impact asset allocation, will continue to be evolving regulatory standards, which are going to require sustainable factors in investment processes. And it's no different in Brazil, where today's announcements by the bank reflects a true sense of purpose around sustainability. In fact, this evolution is especially important in Brazil, where sustainable efforts have been driven by the imperativeness to protect the Amazon. Despite efforts across public and private sector, there is still considerable distance between where things are and where people in Brazil and all over the world wish for them to be. We are seeing a private sector come together like never before, because they understand that the actions today are inextricably linked to everybody's future. Their social license to operate depends on it. This is a seminal moment for Brazil, and I applaud the bank for its actions today. Just as in 1992, when you hosted the Earth Summit, Brazil can lead the world towards a more sustainable future. Once again, I want to thank the central bank for its actions being announced today, and all of you can count on BlackRock to be an ally with the bank, with Brazil on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Obrigado, Larry. Agora eu vou passar a palavra para
Now I'm going to pass the floor to Carola Schuler, who is dealing with Africa, and Ms. Schuler is responsible for the analytical understanding of the banks and the non-banking systems in the East and in Asia, and the debate of the sustainable finances.
I think the word is mine, correct? So I didn't hear sound for a while, so I take it that I can start. So first of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you today. Market demand for ESG analytics continues to visibly ramp up, and at Moody's we believe that demand for ESG, sustainable finance and climate risk solutions, whether physical or transitional, is global and irreversible. In the following, I would like to provide you with an overview about what Moody's, as an integrated risk group, is doing more broadly to assist the market on the road to sustainability, followed by some insights into Moody's rating agency's methodological approach to assessing ESG risks in credit ratings. Moody's Corporation is a global integrated risk assessment firm, and with our affiliates, we are providing analytical offerings that span across credit ratings and research, as well as ESG data, sustainable finance and climate risk solutions, as well as benchmark products and services. Our analytical expertise spans across three main areas. First, through our various affiliates, we provide the market with standalone ESG, sustainable finance and climate risk solutions, such as, for instance, through our French affiliate, VTO Iris, that is a global leader in company sustainability assessments, or through our US-based affiliate, or 27, which is a dedicated provider of climate risk data and analytics. Second, as the leading credit rating agency, Moody's Investor Service is integrating in a transparent and systematic way ESG considerations into credit analysis, ratings, and research. For that purpose, we are using our own tools and assessments and complement those with the expertise and data and analytics from our dedicated ESG specialist affiliates. The third main area comprises Moody's Analytics, where ESG and climate data and assessments are integrated into core solutions for our clients' day-to-day operations and management of sustainability matters. Those include, for instance, macroeconomic scenarios, credit risk models, as well as asset evaluations, stress testing frameworks, or reporting tools. Our commitment to sustainability doesn't stop here, but it is also reflected in our engagement and memberships with a large number of environmental, social, and governance, as well as corporate social responsibility bodies that develop standards and frameworks. For example, Moody's was one of the first financial services companies to support and respond to the TCFD recommendations, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. In addition, last November, Moody's CFO Mark Kaye signed the Net Zero Statement of Support of the Accounting for Sustainability Network of CFOs, committing Moody's to achieve our own net zero emissions by allocating funds to adaptation, as well as embedding greenhouse gas reduction targets and reporting on our own performance. Other examples include our partnerships with the SASB or the Principles for Responsible Investments, the PRI, or CERES, just to name a few. Now, as representative of the rating agency Moody's Investor Service, let me briefly describe how we are incorporating ESG into our rating methodologies and how we are approaching the assessment of credit material ESG factors. In the context of our ratings process, we are fully embedding ESG factors into credit ratings. The aim is to develop an objective, independent, and forward-looking view of all issues that can materially impact the credit quality of a given sector or a given debt issuer. Rating committees consider ESG and climate change risks when it is relevant to the entity under discussion, and Moody's identifies material ESG and climate change risks in its credit rating announcements and research. To support the transparency in our communication, we have established in early 2019 a dedicated ESG rating methodology that outlines the core principles for identifying and assessing ESG risk factors in ratings. This methodology operates as a cross-sector methodology and supplements our overall more than 175 sector-specific rating methodologies. Based on that framework, we are continuously developing and introducing additional tools that assist analysts in their analytical work. Examples include the environmental or social risk heat maps. Those rank order the risk profiles of a large number of industry sectors, actually close to 90. Other examples include additional tools, such as, for instance, carbon transition risk assessments or corporate governance assessments that inform the rating process for each issuer. We are implementing those tools by order of urgencies. That means, for instance, the carbon transition assessments are rolled out first for issuers in industries that are identified as high risk under our environmental risk heat map, such as the global automotive sector or the global refining and marketing industry. As mentioned before, for our analytical process, we also use data and assessments provided by Moody's affiliates, such as V2 Iris or 427 for climate risk data analytics, as mentioned before. Clearly, for us, these affiliates are key pillars of Moody's overall strategy in the ESG space, but they also provide their tools and data more broadly to all market participants. Let me give you some examples of how often ESG considerations are material to credit ratings. So based on our analysis, and during 2019, ESG risks were a material credit consideration in about 1/3 of overall more than 7,500 rating actions that we took on private sector firms. And of the roughly 2,500 rating actions that cited ESG considerations in that period, 88% mentioned governance issues, which is by far the most important ESG factor, followed by 20% that referred to social issues and 16% that cited environmental issues. However, many rating actions refer to more than one ESG consideration. Not in all cases did ESG factors have a negative impact on credit ratings or outlooks. At times, the impact can also be positive. However, more generally, we believe ESG issues have a higher propensity to increase credit risk compared to upside for creditworthiness from positive behavior. Now, during 2020, the picture for ESG impacts on credit ratings changed quite a bit, whereby the vast majority of our rating actions to date referred to the consequences of the coronavirus pandemic, which is not surprising, and which we consider a key social risk. Going forward, we expect the importance of the three factors to largely revert back to the prior observation, whereby medium to longer term, we clearly expect climate change risks to increase in importance for companies' risk profiles, and therefore, by extension, for their credit ratings. Let me conclude my remarks with some thoughts around disclosures. So, while Moody's Investor Service has been focused for some time on making the impact of ESG and climate issues on ratings and research increasingly visible and transparent, we are encouraging disclosure on ESG-related information the same way we do on a variety of other subjects. Better, deeper, and more standardized disclosures are crucial for the market to make sustainable decisions. And to achieve systemic change on the road to sustainability, it is important that different stakeholders are working together and are becoming more synchronized. That includes standard setters, industry representatives, as well as regulators and central banks. And if I'm talking about regulators, I do not only mean financial service industry regulators, but all types of regulators. There's a lot happening already today in the self-regulation space, which is very encouraging, like initiatives like the UN-sponsored PRI that I mentioned before, or the Principle for Responsible Banking, where banks collaborate to develop strategies and solutions. And we actually expect such initiatives will pave the way for the alignment and implementation of business strategies and disclosures, which will eventually be formalized by regulators. And we also believe that we have a role to play for helping the market to make sustainable decisions and advance the strategic resilience of customers and markets, as demonstrated by our efforts in developing our tools and assessments further. Use analytical rigor to bring clarity to complex problems, as well as standardize ESG performance measures and maintain trusted data sets that are essential for decision making. And with that, I'm handing back to Fernanda. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. É com muito prazer que passo agora.
It's with great pleasure that I now hand the floor to Mark Carney. Mr. Carney participates as a special envoy on climate change and finances to the United Nations, and he does not need introduction. In his vast historic of action on sustainable finance, especially as a regulator, as the president of the Bank of England, we have the great pleasure of counting on his perspective on the issue of climate change and environmental change in the financial sector.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to join this very important day for the Banco do Brasil and for the global economy and global environment. And I want to start by applauding the bank for the initiatives taken today, really landmark initiatives taken today. And I was reflecting in preparation for this that it was only a few months ago that I was stepping down from my role at the Bank of England and role as chairing one of the committees of the BIS, a group of central banks. And I have to say that stepping down in the middle, or it was at the start actually, of the COVID crisis, was made much easier by the knowledge that Governor Neto would be at the table, at the core of the central banks. There are a few that I have met over the years who are better at identifying and managing risks than he. Today's initiatives and today's discussion is, I think, a testament to that, looking at this extra pillar that has, and central pillar added to the bank's responsibilities, as he'll detail later. Because in the end, climate risk is an existential risk for our planet, but it's also, as you've heard from the previous speakers, one of the core financial risks in the system. At my time at the Bank of England, one of our responsibilities was to oversee the insurance sector in the UK. Now, that's the fourth largest insurance sector in the world that includes Lloyd's of London and general insurance and reinsurers. And one of the things that we saw because of that is that the number of extreme weather events that affected that industry globally had increased more than 3 times over the course of 25 years. And the insurance-adjusted losses had gone up 5-fold. And on top of that, the protection gap, the parts of the world and economies that were not protected by insurance, because insurers are smart and they adjust their coverage to the risk, had gone up 8 times. So these are real risks that are physically, literally manifesting everywhere, every day. But as you've heard, and I think Larry touched on this, physical risks are just one element of climate risk. It is an imperative of climate physics that if we are going to stabilize temperatures at the Paris objective of less than 2 degrees, or indeed if we're going to stabilize temperatures at any level, we have to ultimately get to net zero. And so the challenge is the transition from a world where we are rapidly using up our carbon budget to one where there is no net addition of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And that creates a combination of both risk and opportunity, and a transition that in many respects has been accelerated by the crisis, the COVID crisis that we're living through. After all, one of the challenges, there are very few companies that came into this health and economic crisis with a strategy which is exactly on point for the conditions that exist now or from which we will emerge with. And as a consequence, there's a big strategic reset happening to companies all around the world, in Brazil, in Canada, the UK, and beyond. And as part of that strategic reset, at this moment of crystallization as well of the climate crisis, companies are increasingly looking and being asked to look at by all of their stakeholders, what is their strategy to achieve net zero? And that brings the transition risk to the fore. As you heard Larry Fink say a few moments ago, climate risk is investment risk. And also implicit in his remarks and the actions of the financial sector, this transition is one of the greatest commercial opportunities of our time, because there will be significant investment made in Brazil, around the world, in order to move us from where we are to where we need to go to. And one of the big determinants of value and risk will be whether a company is on the right or wrong side of climate history, whether it's prepared for the transition, and whether it can move forward. So, on the balance of my time, what I want to say is just a few words about the COP26 process and how we're looking to take this situation and put in place the foundations so that every professional financial decision can take climate change into account, whether it's for managing risks seizing opportunities, ultimately achieving those better risk-adjusted returns. And there's really 4 elements to that, and I'll go through them quickly and before I hand back. The first is what our colleague from Moody's just touched on, which is around reporting a series of information that's necessary to do this type of analysis. Now, one of the centerpieces, and Moody's was very much, as was BlackRock, at the heart of the development of this, is the TCFD. It was formed by the private sector, by the market, if you will, for the market, catalyzed by the G20, heavy Brazilian representation in the initial development of it, and I'm pleased to see that quite widespread application of some of the leading companies and banks in Brazil of those TCFD principles. So the leading companies in the world are applying these climate disclosure principles, the TCFD, and there's over $140 trillion of assets, balance sheet under management that wants this disclosure. And really the challenge for the official community is to move something that's come out of the private sector and translate it into public standards, regulatory standards, to move it from being voluntary to a pathway for it to be mandatory. And that's one of the challenges we've set ourselves for COP26. The second, and that's the first bucket, if you will, around reporting. The second pillar is around is around risk. And specifically, and this goes again to the heart of the bank's announcements and initiatives, is what are central banks and supervisors doing to ensure that the institutions that they oversee, banks and insurers particularly, that they have the capabilities and that they are managing these physical and transition risks. And that means supervisory attention and guidelines. And it also means for 16 of the world's leading central banks conducting climate stress tests of those institutions. The third area is around returns, actually seizing the opportunities around this transition from where we are to where we need to go. And the challenge there is to get the information, not just about where companies are today, but where they're going. So what is their transition plans? Are those transition plans consistent with this move towards net zero? And how does the manager of assets, whether it's a global asset manager like BlackRock or an individual pension fund or insurer, how do they report where their portfolios are consistent with where this needs to go? And this is technology that is being developed, and we expect to have in place again for COP26. Let me make one other point in terms, and this is the fourth pillar of our work, which is there is a missing market in climate finance, and that is a market for nature-based solutions. That's a market that values the natural capital. No country has greater natural capital than Brazil. Are these nature-based solutions, these carbon sinks, do they have value? Is there a market to reforestation, for example? Is there a market as well for the offsets that are created from moving from fossil fuel energy generation to renewable energy generation? At present, that market is patchy, it's fragmented, it's small. It's only about $300 million per year in transactions, when it should and could be measured in the tens, if not hundreds of billions a year over time. So we have struck another private sector task force along the lines of the TCFD, this time led by Bill Winters, the CEO of Standard Chartered, and Annette Nazareth, a former SEC commissioner, and staffed with people from financial institutions, the third sector, rating agencies, data providers as well from across the global financial system to come up with a blueprint for this market, which will be essential to our success. Listen, there are some very important announcements. There's a lot of work to be done, so I will bring my remarks towards a close, but let me reiterate just how pleased but not surprised I am by the announcements made by the central bank today. This is true leadership, again, from Governor Nieto and from all his colleagues at the Banco do Brasil. It will make an enormous difference to not just managing these risks around climate change, but really having the financial system in Brazil and globally seize the opportunities around this transition to the benefit of all our citizens. Obrigado, and congratulations.
Obrigado, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Chegamos agora ao Sistema Financeiro Nacional. Vou chamar
Now we get to the financial system, and now I'm gonna call Márcio Lopes. And once the sustainable development is on the core of the development, this is called by Márcio, and he's going to talk about this, and the floor is his. Thank you so much for your collaboration. A very good afternoon to all. Chairman Otávio Campos, Governor Otávio Campos, Director Fernanda Lopes, and to everyone, welcome. Thank you so much. And the Central Bank, thank you so much for your presentation, because this is such a great opportunity to talk about hashtag this sustainability dimension. And the Central Bank couldn't be behind in the process of the evolution of humanity and the changes that are happening all throughout the cloth of the humanity leads to this topic that is extremely important to this dimension of the central bank currently. And many people say that this are purely marketing actions because those are reasons to value some niches of the market. But what we can observe is that the cooperative observed really well as well, is that sustainability is a backdrop of the human being as a whole and the future generations that are there and that are reaching us and that are building their networks all around the world. Those are generations that are able to do a model of communication that is completely new, and they are able to elect presidents of the republic and developed countries, and they are able to promote an Arabic Spring and traditions that are historically closed. They are able to change the global trends of the society. The cooperatives, since they deal mainly with their main capital, which is people, the cooperative has in its capital more than financial resources, but the trust, the built of trust to people that is completely connected to this development. That is why a cooperative system in Brazil as a whole has defined as a pillar of the new strategic plan and of our reviewed plan during the pandemic or post-pandemic. First of all, it goes through integrity. And all the cooperatives need to go through this. And integrity is innovation, the practical innovation in all levels. And in third place, and not least importantly, the sustainability. I think that with time, the bank wanted to propose these actions, and it affirms with all certainty that it is really welcome this idea to all of the cooperatives in Brazil in general, and especially to the financial institutions. When Mr. Otavio and Miss Fernanda talked to me about this, and the few contacts that I made with the cooperatives, the idea was really well accepted, and the cooperatives were all silent for this idea to be implemented. They are anxious to help in this movement of these ideas of creating benefits and creating procedures that can really print a value that can be added in the procedures that are done with sustainability for us to be able to do not only what people are doing, but to do more and to do differently and to do more. Brazil needs this. We are still a long way behind of the developed countries. But I think that with time, we have a lot of will, we have the profile of people that really strive to go better in this field. And I say without a doubt that these institutions are going to be great partners of the central bank and of its partners in this procedure. But I can also say that there are many cooperatives that, along with the financial institutions, especially the ones that are related to the agriculture, the producers, the small producers, are very anxious for this to happen and for us to surf this wave of innovation, this wave that humanity is wishing to surf so much. So, with the cooperatives of transportation, health, and work and labor, therefore, Mr. Chairman and Governor, the central bank should be congratulated, and all of your directors are really attentive to the differences that are being put. So count on the cooperatives on these procedures, because the cooperatives are going to be friends and partners of the central bank in this procedure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marshall. Now I hand the floor to Isaac Sidney, who is the current president of the Brazilian Federation of Banks, FEBRABAN. Isaac, in addition to being the former director, he was also the general prosecutor of the Central Bank of Brazil. He has important knowledge in the private and public sector with a rare capacity that is important for this sector. Isaac, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank and also praise the Central Bank of Brazil, and I would like to congratulate the president and all the directors, the deputy governors, Mr. Otávio Damaso, Fernanda, and Paulo Sérgio. Also, I would like to greet the president of class, Mr. Márcio Lopes, from the Brazilian Organization of Cooperatives. And I'm very happy to be part of this event representing the banking sector, the financial sector. It is an opportunity that allows the sector to reinforce the commitment of FEBRABAN as well as the banks with the green agenda. I would like to highlight that this commitment is not just a new concern, but actually it's a joint effort. The banking sector has always been attentive to the needs of the sustainable development. The banks, for no other reason, are the center of the productive change in the country, and I am 100% sure that they will foster the actions for the development of an economy that is more and more sustainable. In order to achieve that goal, I would say that it's not only up to us to manage or just mitigate the risks, social environmental risks in the moment of the concession of credit, but we need to channel more funds for the financing of a transition for the green economy. I remember very well in 2014, I had the privilege of following with the central bank. At the time, I was the general prosecutor or the general attorney of the bank, and I followed a discussion of a very innovative initiative that led the banks to elaborate their policies of social environmental responsibility. This initiative, by the way, to this day is a great differential in the financial sector in regards to other markets. Febraban in 2014, I wasn't here yet, but I need to make that registration that we reinforced our regulation and we published a social environmental guideline. We believe that we were in the right line because we had regulators and regulated on the same with the same effort, and you can see that the SDGs agenda has increased. Banks have made reviews of their social environmental policies, and it is also important to highlight the international regulation ended up by improving along the years. Today we have the recommendations on climate change, the network of central banks for a financial sector that is greener, as well as I would like to highlight the principles for banking responsibility, a very large framework that is aligned with central banks' initiatives. We are going to keep in line with the measures of the regulator. Febraban is going to improve its self-regulation, social environmental regulation, and we are going to incorporate not only the climate issue but also SDGF issues related with the financial system. I would like to talk about the financial flow for green economy. About 5 years ago, Febraban has been developing a very relevant work so that we can identify the so-called green economy financing. There are those financings with a high level of social environmental impact as well as a higher exposure to climate change. I would like to highlight that the central bank has given us great support as it gave us access to the credit service called STR that allows every bank individually to analyze their portfolios of credit under the light of social environmental risk as well as social as well as environmental risks. I must also highlight an issue related to with credit balance. When we get a cohort of the total of credit portfolio, credit that is given by the companies, in December of last year, we reached 22% of the balance in the credit portfolio destined for the sector that contribute with the so-called green economy. This data by itself reveals and shows the importance that this banking sector has given to financing this kind of economy. The banks, therefore, have intensified their action when it comes to sustainability. As a matter of fact, not only during the pandemic, which is more recent, but also in the environmental area that has more critical aspect today, banks are part of solution, not of the problem. Banks play a very important role that I consider important to set the direction of funds as well as activities that contribute for sustainable development. The sector is very much mobilized, and I would like to highlight some examples. This year, for example, we've had the first emission of green bonds by a private bank in Brazil. We've also created programs for financing of green financing with better interest rate and better conditions for those loaners who make better provisions. The bank has also incorporated the analysis of SDGs issues integratedly in their portfolio. The banks have also adopted measures to reduce the impacts of the activities themselves, such as the purchase of credit, renewables energies credit. And the most recent and emblematic example was the plan for the Amazon that was announced by the three big major banks in Brazil. Some of them say that these banks created the consultative council of the Amazon, composed by experts that are well known, and they already work to build a model that allows for the tracking of the bonds of productive chain of the country, especially those chains that are in the agribusiness. Why is that? To stop the financing of companies and farmers that promote illegal deforestation of the Amazon, and FEBRABAN is assessing whether or not it is the case of potentializing these actions with an approach that could be more sectorial. We are moving towards that direction. And finally, I would like to make some short comments about the Amazon. I understand that it cannot be no longer a side chapter. The Amazon is in the middle of a great competitive advantage that Brazil has. Preserving the Amazon is to contribute to the expansion of the Brazilian economy. FEBRABAN shows every month a survey that shows, that is called the FEBRABAN Observatory. The last research showed that 33% of the Brazilian population agrees with making policies stronger, which shows the number of society that is involved in mobilizing against deforestation. FEBRABAN has followed with great concern data on burnt fires in Brazil that have increased. We also say that there should be an intensification of measures to fight deforestation. And this is why it's important that the state focuses and strengthens inspections so that the law can be applied, and the banks will play their role. We are going to help the state and the society to reduce the numbers of deforestation in the Amazon. As a matter of fact, some banks say that they are going to finance sustainable events in the Amazon. We can offer economical gains to those who preserve the region, and we're also going to finance productive change that can put Brazil in a position of highlight. I would like to finish by saying that the financial system is walking a line that is aligned with the best practices. The ethic behavior is translated in the protection of the environment, and the financial resumption after the crisis has to be sustained and has to be inclusive. This is why I greet the central bank. I commend the central bank because this event makes us more aligned with the world, and this is important and necessary in this moment, and shows the importance of sustainability, especially for the attraction of foreign funds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Now we're gonna pass the floor to Justine Liebel, and she is the manager of financial market, and she is going to be signing the MOU with Governor Roberto Campos Neto.
It is an honor to be here today to support BCB's agenda on fostering the development of sustainable finance in Brazil's economy. I should also say that it's been a pleasure to share the stage with Mark Carney today, who has also been a champion on this agenda and has very much been leading the way on getting central banks to take seriously the issue of climate change and putting in place the TCFD. The global pandemic has brought the economy to a near halt and left millions of people out of work. Never before has the global economy suffered a shock of this scale all at once. The COVID-19 pandemic is not an isolated crisis. There will be more. Environmental degradation encouraged the emergence of new pathogens like COVID. As the IPCC has previously suggested, this is the first of what is likely to be a century of shocks related to environmental degradation linked to climate change. This puts the global financial system at risk. During this pandemic crisis, we are reminded of the fact that at the heart of the profit-driven private financial economy is the central bank. Central bank policies have taken a radical step forward in the past months, most notably from the ECB, the Bank of England, and the US Feds, to avoid a true global economic meltdown, policies unimaginable before the crisis. If monetary policy and governments will do for the climate what they are currently doing for COVID, the transition to sustainable green growth will be feasible. We need the banking sector to have a mission to grow thematic labeled debt markets. More green deals need to be made. Green credit lines need to be put into the market. Financial institutions need to incorporate climate risk analysis as an internal procedure to achieve the following objectives. First, to attract more financial resources to green industries and divert financial resources away from high carbon growth industries to promote the transition towards a green economy without requiring additional public funds. The second objective is to help financial institutions identify, quantify, and avoid climate-related financial risks, enhance their risk resilience, and thus increase the robustness of the financial system. There are a growing number of tools that have been emerging internationally, most notably the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, the Climate Bond Principles and Standards, green rating systems, as such that Moody's has put out, benchmarks and frameworks, including the TCFD. All these tools are readily available for central banks to support their efforts in assessing climate risk exposure and putting in place the appropriate management and mandates that will set direction for their local economies. What does this mean for Brazil's financial sector? Brazil has an absolute extraordinary opportunity to be the world's engine of sustainable agriculture, food production, and clean energy at scale. They are in a unique position, the country is, globally to lead, the sources of ideas on low carbon economy, and a champion for sustainable finance for the Latin American region. I do want to commend the Governor, Roberto Neto, for his leadership in recognizing the role the BCB plays in helping to achieve this ambition and ensuring Brazil's financial system is equipped to support the growth towards a sustainable, greener economy. Climate Bonds Initiative has been at the start supporting Brazil's journey towards building a sustainable finance market. CBI, a global organization, nonprofit, investor focus, has been at the forefront of the development of the green bond market since 2010. In 2016, during a very challenging year for the country, we launched together with Brazil's industry players and institutional investors, Brazil's Green Finance Initiative. The BGFI served as a platform to exchange knowledge and expertise amongst international investors and Brazil's domestic investor base. But most importantly, it also created a dialogue and exchange between Brazil's potential investment pipeline across energy and agriculture, companies and corporates coming to the table, engaging with the investment community, each of themselves teaching what one is looking from the other. It has been a huge success. We also had an investor roadshow specifically dedicated to Brazil, 5 companies coming to London, and this is where 150 financial industry players, along with top investors from the Europe and UK, sat and listened to the new economic narrative that Brazil was putting forward, most notably highlighting its potential for sustainable agriculture at scale, but also looking at other infrastructure around water, sanitation, energy, and transport. Following that investor roadshow into 2017, Brazil took the stage within the region, being one of the largest issuers, $4 billion equivalent in that year alone, BNDES being one of those, with a very, very exceptional issuance of $1 billion offshore issuance. But also in that same year, CBI and BNDES came together, where CBI supported BNDES in putting in place a local green debenture fund to catalyze the renewable energy market in Brazil. It was a huge success. There was also the signing of the MOUs this year. This was very, very, very important and instrumental. Going into 2018, we started to hone in on the sustainable agriculture narrative for Brazil and its infrastructure opportunities. This year, we signed 2 MOUs, one with the Minister of Infrastructure and one with the Minister of Agriculture. These are there to provide the technical assistance for both those 2 institutions to be able to foster and help realize the opportunities that Brazil has before it across those 2 major sectors. And also in June, we launched the Sustainable Agri-Investment Roadmap for Brazil, of which we were fortunate to have the governor as one of the representatives in that launch. This has highlighted that there is roughly about 600 billion reais of green investment opportunities in the sector. There is no other country in the world that can stand behind that level of opportunity. We need to realize that. Today marks another milestone in Brazil's journey, this time with the attention on the banking sector. With CBI's technical and advisory support, the BCB will focus on 4 key areas. 1, promote the exchange of information on sustainable finance, regulation, mechanisms, and initiatives to promote this agenda in the national financial system. 2, to open the exchange of information to support the incorporation of international criteria and taxonomies into the systems used by the BCB. 3rd, to provide the analysis and the development of tools so that financial institutions can measure and mitigate climate and socioeconomic risks, including the alignment with global initiatives such as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And finally, but not least, to foster the sustainable finance market, enabling a greater attraction of domestic and international investors who demand sustainable investment alternatives in their portfolios. We are very pleased to be working closely with the BCB over the next few months to achieve their sustainable finance agenda that will establish proper management of socio-environmental and climate risks in Brazil's financial sector. Thank you very much, Governor, and to the rest of Brazil's central bank staff for having us with you. It is a sheer pleasure to be here at this event today.
Obrigada.
Thank you. Now I hand the floor to President Roberto Campos Neto, who will now talk about the sustainable part of this agenda, BC hashtag. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Fernanda. Thank you very much, everyone who's here. I'm going to start greeting the participants, starting with Mr. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock. I think it's hard to find another name that has done so much for the financial industry in the world. Also, I'd like to thank Mr. Carney, who is one of the most highlighted, most important central bankers in the world. Also, I would like to thank Carola Schuler and also Márcio Lopes from OCB, a great partner of the central bank. Also, I would like to thank Mr. Isaac Sidney, who's a friend of us, and also Justine. Thank you for your kind words. And all of the directors and deputy governors of the central bank, as well as all the central bank teams, we have worked endlessly to ensure that these events took place as it is happening now, especially Diogo Nogueira, Ricardo Halles. Now let's move forward. I'm going to start talking a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So the strategic agenda and promotion of sustainable actions, adequation of risks in the financial system, integration of sustainable variables in the process of decision-making of the central bank. The environmental issue is extremely important and awakens a lot of interest in the society. This environmental issue definitely is part of the order of the day. It is a relevant issue also for the policymakers, investors. We've already talked about in other opportunities that CEHAST agenda is strategic and dynamic, and today we're incorporating yet another dimension in our agenda of work. In sustainability, we're going to deal with sustainability from the perspective of finance, the financial perspective. We're going to talk about the promotion of sustainable finance, like was mentioned before, the right management of social environmental risks, integration of sustainable variables, as well as other issues that affect the financial system as a whole. And they will be clear along my presentation. I'm sorry that I'm moving through the slides very quickly. I'm sorry, maybe I went way too fast. Well, this is the script of our presentation, in other words, of today's agenda. First, I'm going to talk about the importance of the environmental issue, as was mentioned before. The society knows the society needs to know how it affects the actions of the central bank. And then I'm going to mention some of the actions that the central bank has taken in regards to environmental issues. And then The deputy governors are gonna talk about sustainability. This agenda, which involves social environmental responsibility of the central bank, policies, partnerships, supervision, oversight, and regulation. As I've mentioned, environmental issue came in the agenda of the day. The nurturing of the society on environmental issues happened phase by phase. And I have described these phases. The first phase started with the production of clean energy. Then we've had the second phase, which was connected with the first one, where we started to be more concerned with food production respecting the environment, in other words, clean agriculture. And finally, we came into the third phase that we believe to be very important, which is the phase in which we start to influence the whole financial flow on the globe as a whole. It's a phase with investors, with environmental policies. These influence funds, the whole part of infrastructure, housing. We understand that this part where we are now is very important and very hard for a country today to have a strong resumption without observing part of this capital. So it is very important to follow this agenda. There is a myth that the adoption of sustainable measures by companies decreases their productivity and therefore their profitability. This is a myth that needs to be destroyed. Studies show that sustainable practices generate a reduction of waste through the development of new processes that use less resources and raw material, efficient operations that increase productivity and reduce costs, and we have seen sustainable practices that may be expensive to cost, but they can be profitable as well. The strengthening of working force, adoption of sustainable practices are associated with more training and working force, as well as more connections within the company. Also, it increases the engagement and motivation of the company and attracts talented employees. Literature finds evidence that sustainable practice is associated with the increase of sustainability of workers. Literature goes beyond and suggests that there is an increase in productivity of about 16%. Now, the central banks, and when it comes to central banks, environmental issues has the potential of affecting their two main areas of action, the financial policy as well as financial stability. In the case of political of monetary policies, we need to remember that shocks are hard to forecast. There are many examples, such as, for example, harvest, prices of food, energy, etc. There is also an uncertainty that is very high on persistence, amplitude, and magnitude of climate change, which increases the magnitude. These shocks can also become recurrent, which may affect productivity, economical growth in the long run, as well as interest rate. Financial stability. Climate shocks also has effects on the financial sector, and it was mentioned before by Mr. Carney that we have physical risks that come from climate change that may happen, such as drought, floods, etc., and even burns, and that can affect many sectors of the economy, such as agribusiness and real estate. And there is also another risk that comes from the transition. These risks can have impact on financial stability since they have the potential of affecting default, solvency, etc. Central banks need to evaluate the instability of the central banks in regards to shocks. These shocks can change the ratings. There could also be feedback between the economy as a whole and financial sector. And then we mentioned contamination that could happen in a negative fashion. Sorry. This crisis has produced deep changes. It brings challenges as well as opportunities. I have mentioned that there is a common factor in the resumption that may be a consensus in the talks among central bankers and decision makers, and the three factors are: the first of all, that we are going to have a recovery that may be based on sustainability and inclusion. So there is a greater consistency on the need of sustainability as a whole. The environmental issue that used to be a concern to the society even before the crisis is now even more relevant. Economical agendas need to be intelligent, need to be important for the recovery. Therefore, the first factor or the first great pillar is that the recovery has to be sustainable and inclusive. The second pillar, which was mentioned by Larry Blackhawk, is the part of acceleration of technology. And the third one is the changes in the global value chain. We are saying that the first pillar has a very important relevance, and the part of it is sustainability, which is going to guide great part of the investments from now on. Now, talking about a little bit about the timeline that was mentioned here, some of the initiatives that the central bank has taken. The part of sustainability is it's already part of our agenda. It's in our blood already. The central bank has a long history of attention geared towards sustainability with actions that go back to the 90s. We were the pioneers in the launching of the sustainability dimension, which focuses on protecting the borders. The central bank as a regulator has taken many initiatives. I'm going to highlight two of them. The Resolution 4327, 2014, which establishes guidelines for policies of social environmental sustainability responsibilities for financial institutions, as well as Regulation 4577 from 2017 that deals with integrated risk management, GRI, including environmental risks among those that the financial institutions need to find, monitor, report, control, and mitigate in its Article 6. In this context, it is important to highlight initiatives that have created concrete impact. All of the financial institutes have policies of responsibilities, and the central bank demands deputy governor for this policy. Therefore, it has a great importance. It has an ombudsman relationship with the clients, with which the central bank also demands the need of a governor. After some studies, mitigating these risks have been part of the supervision 2019-2020, and the director is going to talk further on that. Social environmental risks since the year 2019 has been an element that is specific of the main instrument of supervision known as rating market for BC to assess and evaluate the minimum amount of capital of every financial institution, which has a clear picture of the risks on the market. In this operation, there are mappings made by the central bank. The central bank maps monthly the exhibit of every financial exposure of every financial institution following the World Bank guidelines in the United Nations. The central bank has also mapped all of its clients with operations that represent environmental risks, for example, construction of dams, for example. The current situation allows for the implementation of this situation for other situations, so we could have strong innovations for the next few years. Even though we do not have specific regulations on climate change, the use of our financial system, the fact of our financial system has a smaller risk when we compare it with other regions of the world that are more affected by these risks, such as, for example, Mexico, that had some cases of alert because it was rebuilt on springs such as Cancun, for example. I'm not going to talk about that, but it is important that the central bank has already carried out stress tests because of the drought in 2014. It has also carried out studies on the impact of droughts and has been improving its tools increasingly. As I have mentioned, the launching of this sustainable feature puts the central bank on the border, in the front line of the environmental issue, and the society follows these issues very dearly, and the central bank will follow on that. I would like to hand the floor back to Governor Fernanda, Deputy Governor Fernanda, and the other deputies. The governors will detail our dimension of sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Roberto. And measures that are taken to the central bank and other measures that are directed to the financial system as a whole. And I'm going to start talking about some internal um, measures that are taken to the central bank and to the national system. And then I'm going to pass the floor to Otavio and to another speaker as well. So, the dimensions of sustainability that I have mentioned before involves all the areas of the central bank, and we would like to try to foster a culture of sustainability internally. And we're going to emphasize internal campaigns, use of bicycles and reduction of plastic bags and other initiatives. We're going to focus on the great public as well, introducing the sustainability project as well. And beyond this, internal measures that are focused in the servers and the awareness on this sense inside the central bank, we are doing different studies to reduce the environmental impact, optimizing procedures, reusing materials, and also reducing the coin production as well. And we are doing the environmental responsibility understanding as well, and this policy was done in 2017, and it rules our internal procedures. And in the review, we're going to do a review of the advances that we did in the previous years and the development, sustainable development that we have been doing in the measures inside the central bank. And as I said, our actions are not results. This is something alive that we keep on updating all the time, and we have the task force with the financial disclosures procedure that Carney has talked about a lot during the intervention, and this was created, built with different initiatives of financial industry could understand the impact of the climate change, and the initiative was supposed to be done to have the transparency of the climate change and the cooperation of each institution affecting this fact. And we're going to adopt this internally, and knowing what are the effects and the different supports that we can provide to the Brazilian society and to Latin America as a whole. Finally, I pass to the internal regulation of the central bank. We have an integrated understanding that is recognized nationally and internationally. This integrated policy corresponds to several risk analysis for the management of these risks and to the support of the approach that is provided to the risks, especially the environmental risks. The environmental risks are going to be discussed regularly in all of the instances of the decision making of the administration of the central bank. And besides this is very important for us. We want to have a transparency on all our payments to the society as a whole, and this report is going to be provided with the TCFD support and all of their guidelines, and we're going to tackle this issue that way. I have said in the beginning that the central bank analysis in the sustainable development challenges, we with the internal, national and international issues are essential for us, for this agenda, for us to continue doing the further developments in this initiative. And one of the most important factors for our hashtag sustainable banks was started in March this year. The FIAS Energy was a formulation of the best practices in the financial market. We have participated since March actively in all of the dynamics of the NGFS, and we have learned a lot. And great part of the initiatives that we are bringing today were influenced by these discussions that we have had with them, and we are trying to deepen our NGFS initiatives. We have also seen, we have just signed an MOU with CBI, which is an international institutions for the green titles that can try to be more resilient facing this climate change. And this is going to help very much us keep all of our knowledge and understanding and actions within the green titles initiative. We have several other partnerships in other institutes, and I'm not going to mention all of them, but it would be important to mention the German International Cooperation System, where we have definitely been able to exchange the best practices, and the monetary authority as well. Now I'm going to pass the presentation to the part of the policies that has a direct impact in our national policies. And this was done by Director Paulo, or Governor Paulo, and Governor Carlos. So because of this hashtag, we have developed a credit line that is regarded to the sustainability, the sustainable systemic sustainability. We have developed a research internally to have the metrics and parameters, and these studies are going to see the parameters and the liquidity of these policies. And the integrated policy is being done, held with the analysis to see if the international laws are being accordingly to what we are doing here as well. I'm going to pass the floor to Marcelo, who is going to talk about the internal policies. Before
talking about the measures that we are going to adopt on supervision, that are measures for the perfectioning of what we do, I believe that it is worth mentioning some of the breakthroughs that have been made in the last few years. As President Roberto has said, the Central Bank of Brazil has been a pioneer in regulating social environmental risks. When this risk was defined, it had the probability of financial institutions having loss due to social environmental losses. In the last few years, we've had great learnings, and I am sure that we still have a lot to learn. Today, the whole financial system and all of the emissions of the financial system present a policy of social environmental policy that is consolidated along these 5 years. We've learned a lot with the process of banks, and I am sure that they have learned a lot with the demands that have been made by the supervision. This is an area where the theme has the same relevance as the president or governor has mentioned, especially on money laundering. We've also learned a lot in the last 5 years with events that have been remarkable. I believe that the first one of them was the water crisis in 2014 and 14-15. Maybe the Central Bank of Brazil has been the first one to carry out a stress test on climate risks, and in the last few years the whole world has debated with supervisors all over the globe on this issue. Then we could not fail to highlight that between 2015 and 2016, the Brazilian society and the economy as a whole suffered because of events that affected segments and companies that are relevant, that got involved in practices of corruption. Today I can affirm that no bank grants any credit operation without the sustainability branch of the bank providing its assessment on social, environmental, as well as the sustainable risks for the company. We've also had some sad events that have served for the improvement of the supervision and financial system as a whole, such as Mariana and Brumadinho, two environmental disasters. Today, we also map from studies that we adopted from the UN, and we also cooperated from EFC, that shows us what are the main the segments that are more likely to have environmental risks. In our first initiative, which is to broad and amplify the collection of information, we have a segment, for example, agriculture. But within agriculture, I can have one that is very highly dependent on water. I can have green agriculture, like Isaac said. So what we want to do from this data collection is to have information that are more detailed, so that we can make a much more thorough analysis, not only of clients but also of everything in the system. Today, we have the condition of seeking public information about environmental fines, about whether or not the company has dams in critical situations, from collection of information along with other authorities, and we want to automatize that. And we are sure that with technological information and what is possible to do today with georeferencing, I am sure that we have a whole world to explore, and I am sure that we have a lot to improve in our process in regards to social, environmental, and climatic risks. Another point is that starting in 2018, 2019, the international organizations started to deal with environmental issues and climate risks. So from this greater detail of information that we are collecting regarding the quality of every operation that is done within the financial system, we are going to be able to carry out stress tests on climate with a lot more precision, and we are going to do that starting with the report Financial Stability that will be issued in 2022. These are what we have prepared for the area of supervision. I now hand the floor to the director.
Good afternoon, everybody. Initially, I would like to thank you and all the international invitees for your positions. This is a very important day for the central bank, and we are highlighting this agenda and giving importance to it in the best way, because it is necessary that we do that, and it's very important due to the topics that I'm going to approach here. So I would like to, before go to the specific points, to congratulate Fernanda for her conduction in this work. It is a very transversal topic here in the central bank, and she has coordinated and brought this issue closely to us. So I would like to ask for the press management for them to provide their questions through to our email. And the first measure that I would like to talk about would be related to the social environmental work and the financial institutions and the priority that it has. I think that many of you have provided the central policy and this work that we have done in the Rio Plus 20 work, and we have concluded that in 2014 with the resolution. After this years, we had the regulation years with the financial institutions and review, and with that we have learned very much during this cycle and in this process. So constantly we have seen it broaden and deepen in the discussion of the climatic change, of the climate change, and of the risks that it provides. So the combination of these factors are important for us to go forward in this procedure and this agenda. The main changes are the risk assessment for the climate change and the social and environmental assessment, and we can divide that into the social risks and the environmental risks and allow to understand the climate risks that was mentioned by many lecturers here today, and the relation it has to the financial problems that it can have and the risks that we can face, and the transition risk that we can have with the financial loss, as well as the financial instability in this transition of the low carbon emission. This needs to be understood and monitored by the financial institutions, and the central bank is going to aid a lot in this aspect as well. So another aspect that is going to be really well established with that is the risk management and the appetite to risks and stress management regarding to business. And what do we expect from these measures in alignment with the Brazilian sector and the discussions that are still under course and on the world as a whole? So, and at the Central Bank of Brazil, we are going to continue perfecting this and the strengthening of the social environmental understanding and the management of it in a whole manner, providing a better quality and clarity of information in the social environmental risks and a better understanding of the climate risks that we have. And this is more and more evident in the discussions that we have and in the findings that we can have all around the world because of the pandemic. So, with that, we have an implementation of this rule, and we're going to promote a few events to discuss these advances with society, with the financial sector, and we're going to provide this public consultation, and throughout 2020 we are going to continue perfecting this topic. And the second topic would be the increase of the transparency according to TCFD, and the former governor that mentioned this as being really important. These recommendations is part of a task force that was requested by the G20, and this task force is supposed to increase the relation of the countries regarding the climate change and the financial sector and the different tactics that can be used, and coming from the starting point of the decision making of the investments of the borrows that can happen, not only the insurance and the banking systems as a whole, the banking system as a whole, the financial system. So this information is also important for us to register the activities regarding the climate change. So we are going to incorporate the regulations in this operations of TCFD, and these are going to be incorporated by all the financial institutions that right now are being partially used in the resolutions internally. We're going to have this procedure that is going to be obligatory. So this was the second one. The third measure is going to be a more robust one regarding the green economy. We have a whole data bank of information regarding the rural um, the rural credit line that can be provided specifically to the agriculture, and we're going to understand within this information that is provided in the industry and the lines of credit and the credit lines that are going to be provided to the agriculture, they are going to have to obey certain criteria, and the operation of pasture land and the um, forest and the use of energy in an adequate manner, and the carbon sequestration will have to be done in a proper manner. So all of this criteria will have to be met, and we're going to promote a debate with the society to be able to understand what we can improve, and this is going to be provided as an option for the person that is going to receive this credit to have this information and to have in the system an improvement in the monitoring of this operation, especially the ones that are going to be
sobre
related
produção
to
com
the
área de preservação
SDGs.
ambiental,
We're going to
sobre
understand which of them are going to be related to the indigenous lands, and it's going to be all converging to this criteria, and if there is any convergency of understanding, we will have to consult the system to see if that can be done or not. So we're going to be able to track it better. And to end this, we have a lot of expectations regarding this, and this is a very important point. This is going to be able to help us very much in our practices, especially regarding to the level of adherence in the society, and it's going to make it easier for us to understand who can get the line of credit or not, and in the production of the tracking of who got what is going to help in the inbound and the strengthening of this process regarding the social environmental risks, which is going to ensure that the agenda, the green agenda, is effective in our financial system. As I have mentioned before, we are going to increase the lines of credit. Like I said before, we're talking about more than 200 million reais in more than 2 million operations. So in our agenda, there will be phases that are going to start in July 2022. Finally, there is this aspect regarding the lines of credit and the rural line of credit. The proposal is for us to increase up to 20% of the limits of the operations of the rural lines of credit in a sustainable manner, for us to provide a line of credit for those who need that direction, and they are going to get 20% more of the line of credit that they are allowed nowadays, and that is going to be completely linked to the credit line that we have at the moment, and it's going to help very much this rural producers that are going to be able to, in Prodaf, for example, which is an organization that we have 11% of them with the capacity to adhere to this line of credit. Now we're going to increase that to 20%, and this potential actually is going to increase to 40%. Those that add to this initiative are going to benefit to the access of a higher volume of line of credit. And that is going to really foster us migrating to operations of credit that can effectively be aligned with the sustainability measurements that we were talking about. So now I'm going to pass the floor again.
It's my final remark. But we've studied a lot, and Dr. Fernanda was the one who commanded this effort. But we studied because other countries have made this effort, and what was discussed in regards to sustainable measures. We understand that what is being launched today put us on the border of sustainability, in the same way that we understand that what we did with Open Bank and PIX also puts us on the borderline of digital transformation. But it's important to highlight that because this agenda is dynamic, the sustainability agenda is also dynamic. And this is a first step to follow a long road of sustainability. And we are looking and discussing with other organizations, and it was mentioned by Mr. McCartney, the issue of pricing, which is an issue that is very dear to us. And it is important to mention that all the measures are related with one another. And we also going to have a relationship or an intersection of the measures that are taken and the policy, the future policies in regards to what we understand as sustainability. Also, I would like to say that we have a hot site that is already available, according to Dr. Fernanda, with all of it being published, as well as the same way that we publicize all of our initiatives in every dimension, we need to do the same. And I believe that the idea of having added a dimension of sustainability in the agenda was actually to show the importance of that this issue has to the central bank and the importance that this issue has for sustainable development in the country growth. In addition to contributing to let go of this myth that sustainability inhibits productivity. In fact, this is a factor that fosters growth. Now we have the press conference. Is that it? Okay, so thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you very much, Paulo. Good afternoon, everyone. We are now receiving some messages from the reporters via email called bccoletivo@bcb.gov.br. The first question that came to us, actually, there are 4 questions from Sergio and Dunga. They asked the following: how is this inclusion of criteria of sustainability going to work for the counterparts on the management of reservations as well as for the selection of investments? Can Brazil change the conception of assets due to these criteria of sustainability? Do you want to answer this question, or would you rather see the 4 questions first? Well, governance of international reservations is very well defined and has many instances
That of decision making and control of results, and all of the alterations that are passed through the border directory. The measures that we are bringing nowadays for decisions bring the risks of the social environmental problems to our decision making. So what we are saying today is that we're going to try to increase the feasibility of the use of this procedure, and this is going to be developed throughout the months, and we're going to try to incorporate the decision making to the social environmental procedure. And what the central bank has regarding the details, well, actually, what I said before is on the same line. The line of credit is going to be systemic, and we are implementing internal studies to understand how to implement that, what are the parameters that need to be chosen, and what types of assets are going to interfere. And this is a measure that is going to be implemented in the next months, but the details are not still specified. Okay.
The third question is how the climate shocks are going to be adopted as well as stress tests. Have there been any simulations on the current impacts with some studies, for example, and how the financial institutions succeeded in these tests? Well, in fact, what is the information that we have regarding the segments? Based on the methodology that we adopt, we already have information whether or not that segment is extremely dependent on water, if it depends on energy, if it is a sector that has a high probability of generating residue, among others. There are many variables that are part of this study. What the central bank is doing is capture, instead of being just based on segment, we are going to capture based on the information that the institutions have been putting together in the last 5 years. We're going to have granulated information regarding operation and clients, and that facilitates, for example, like we did the stress test of the climate risk due to the water crisis of 2014-2015, we had to guide ourselves on segments. So what are we going to do now is, because of these companies that are needy, we could have, for example, a company, depending on the region, where the company could have its own reservoirs, but the banks in that moment, the same metric that we use, for example, that we do when we did the Lava Jato or car wash operation in cars and municipalities, like we did now with the impact that we had in many sectors of the economy because of COVID-19. Today, the central bank has a policy that allows for the moment you identify the companies, you can identify what are the companies that are depending on the companies, and then you can reach to the level of employees and regions that are affected in case there is any breach in certain companies that are more critical for the economy. In that opportunity, the impact was relevant, but with the stress test was this one that we have just published due to the COVID-19 crisis.
And the last question from Mario Sergio from Bloomberg is the pressure of the international investors. The central bank decided to take this investment after the national banking. Although the central bank has this pressure, the vision of Brazil regarding to the environmental crisis could be very negative. So what could the central bank do? It's the same question as Gabriel Shinohara, who talked about the influence of the global funds letter that was signed in June when the investors, the international investors, tackled this problem of Brazil, and this decision of the central bank being launched of hashtag sustainability one agenda. No, I think that we try to describe that in the most didactic way possible in the central bank, and we understood that it was a worry that we needed to elevate, and we needed to understand this sustainability issue. And I started mentioning that there was a correlation that is very strong between the sustainability procedure and the fundamental understanding of the financial resources. And I think that one of the main first meetings that we had with the Central Bank of Brazil and the other central banks, I was really surprised of talking about the social environmental problem and risks globally. And as I said, in all of the NGOs, first being the feeding and the last one being financial, it is really important for the central bank to monitor the flow of the financial flow throughout the country, and I think that that is definitely affects the entire country. So we need to use all of the information to be able to provide a formulation of policies. And I would like to leave it really clear that this work that we have initiated is going to be improved, and we understand that it is really important, and there are some measures that were not done all around the world, and how to evolve that agenda and to provide to the central bank the sustainability policy that is part of the development of the country as well.
The area of oversight that the bank has dealt with for a long time carries over 1,006 inspections every year. 96% of these inspections are routine inspections due to the model of inspection that we have. 7% are strategic priorities. And these, the definition of, when we define the planning of the year, these pieces of information is made public by control organizations. So the issue, social environmental risk, is part of these strategic actions that are like 6 or 7 actions that we take every year. They were established in the year 2017, 18, 19 for the year 2020, and climate change gain momentum during these discussions, especially starting last year. So this is an issue that is very recent, but that is a priority for the central bank for a long time. Just to make clear that what used to be done, we are just increasing intensity, and we are launching new measures and thinking how the current measures will interact, because we understand, will interact with that which we believe is the future of our agenda. We have a question from Fabrício de Castro, who asks, what is going to represent in practice the signature of an MOU with the CPIs? What are the direct consequences for the environment and environmental assets?
Well, the MOU that we have signed with SCIs and involves the best practices of the development of several measures that we are developing today. And as I have mentioned in the previous answer, many initiatives that we are implementing are innovative, and they weren't implemented by other central banks before. We are in the borderline, and we need a lot of support for that. And the exchange with other institutions is really important for the development of these measures from now on. So for the development of these studies and how to implement the measures that we are announcing, in this relation with CBI is very essential for our learning. And another MOU that we have signed today as well is extremely broad and is going to involve several areas in the central bank, and is not only related to the regulation issues and supervision issues, it's related to the economic research and the international understanding and monitoring and other areas of the banking supports as well. And regarding the green credit lines that we have mentioned before, and our discussion has already been around this interactions with CBI is going to identify which are the most relevant ones, right? And that is going to be a very practical application that is going to be in our agenda of work, right? You have anticipated Amanda's question. She would like to understand the concept of green credit and the rural credit line, and if it's going to be something specific for us to start in January 2021. These billions of reais need to be reevaluated for the development of and hiring of these credit lines.
Well, as I've mentioned before, it has a Bureau of Rural Credit, and this bureau is the one that is being improved to incorporate criteria of sustainability. Some of them are very advanced, and This interaction with CBI and other entities will help us to understand what are the main criteria. In the end of the process, if there is an end, we are always going to be in a process of evolvement. We are going to have a bureau that is going to assemble a bunch of information on the issue of sustainability with a very strong connection with this emission or issuing of green bonds. From there on, we're going to be able to characterize the credit operations that are fully or partially aligned with the desires and requirements of investors of this kind of assets. We have a question from Natalia Witt from Portal Capital Reset that asks, the central bank will make mandatory the adoption of the TCFD by financial institutions. From when will that be mandatory?
Yes, we're going to make it mandatory, and what is able to be done that way, remembering that all of these lines of credit is going to be provided for the financial and non-financial institutions and the banking institutions as well. And this procedure within our planning, we're going to be able to put into public consultation the regulation until next year, and probably it's going to be obligatory from 2020 on. And in the process of discussion, we have identified that the financial institutions are adapting to this movement, and to public effects, we are trying to go through this procedure and go through all of these issues. It's just to clarify, we're not only going to make it obligatory in the financial system, we're going to focus internally to the recommendations as well. The last question here is, what are the measures that are going to be announced by the central bank and that are going to be directed to the support of sustainability?
Well, I first bring the consciousness or awareness. This is one of the measures that are very important for us. It's one of the initiatives that comes as a result of our agenda. Rendering accounts to this society is very relevant as well in the perspective of the central bank. I think that we have a lot of things that were done along the years, and now we not only are we going to report but also render account on the involvement of these measures. I believe that one of the measures in terms of regulation, which is of most important, is the Green Bureau. In the talks that we have had in the international forums, we identified that one of the problems, that one of the restrictions to the involvement of this agenda is the cost of information. Companies, for example, have to seek some sort of certification in order to be able to ensure that they have the feature, the green feature. And this provision of information that we're going to have in the Green Bureau cheapens the cost of information. I believe that this is an initiative that could have a great impact on the financial system.
I would just like to highlight that there are measures of all types and that you have mentioned in your supervision. There are new engineers, there is the creation of the bureau that we have mentioned before. But the important thing is that we have a north. And if people take our agenda as an important north, that we take direction, and that is the most important regulation, the agents can anticipate this natural flow. So check the different innovations that have already been done. This is another dimension that we have regarding our proactive agents that are going to be adapting to this new reality in a way that is going to make us very surprised. So I think it's obvious there are many impacts that are immediate, and this data is going to be starting after the process of awareness is recognized by the population, and I think it's going to start right now. We're going to structure that with time, but we're not going to stop here. This is just the first step. And we understand the financial institutions as being important more and more according to the direction that is provided. We're going to innovate on top of that.
Just to add to what Fernando and Roberto have said, the mere fact that is not actually is not that simple of putting that with the dimension of the agenda of the central bank makes the bank moves. When we look at regulation, when we announce that we are going to implement a regulation that will be demanded starting in 2022, financial institution starts to adapt to that process. And we need to remind you that at the same token, we're going to be improving our process of stress test, and that will require more capital from the companies to face the risks. Therefore, the operations from now on will have a better attention to this criteria on this issue, and they will adapt immediately to this process because the regulation is going to start now. But the effectiveness, I would say, that is immediate. Just to add sustainability, I think that is part of everyday life of the institutions. From this year on, 2020, within the main tool of the central bank to assess every financial institution and establish what is the minimum capital that every institution must have, the social environmental risk is already there and it's already being assessed. The fact that you could have the enforcement on one hand saying that you are running more risks, but one of the advantages that we are bringing here today is not only to focus on the risk, but as the Green Bureau says, the opportunities of businesses that are available in the field of sustainability. So you can create incentive to those operations that are more sustainable.
And for that are the last words that we would like to say. And if there's anything that you would like to complement, you feel welcome to do so. I think that the last comment that I was going to make was a summary of what was said here. We understand that it's a first step and it's very important. As it was said before, it's not so complex. And one of the rules that have been mentioned here involves a lot of technicalities that in a way can be provided in this new criteria that of our work, and the society and the great demand that it has is provided to by the international investor, and the company is going to try to find a solution because it wants to have the access to the international funding. So we understand that there are several dimensions, several agendas, and our goal and our objective is to provide the most information we can and to provide the rentability of the bank itself and the investors and part of the regulators as well. But we would like to say once again that what is important is the execution of the project. We're going to follow step by step the dimensions that are going to be done in an organized manner, and the measures, one of the measures is going to involve the provoking of several other advances. So I would like to register here that we are providing a north here as a central bank, and we understand that it's possible and sometimes a little difficult to be part of this regulation and the sustainability project, and I think that is going to be very good for all society. Thank you very much. Thank you.